Welcome to all blade friends. I am a connoisseur of all blades. And a training practitioner. As a professional cinematographer, I will bring you historical findings, detailed and professional reviews of the latest and greatest the blade industry has to offer, including blade maintenance and preservation. I will present to you with all my expertise in filmmaking, my knowledge in the blade craft within my cinematic presentations. This is Steel Forged in Fire, Sword and Knife. Now please enjoy my exclusive interview with Mr. Walter Sorrells, iconic American bladesmith. And please don't forget to subscribe and like, as it will help me greatly to continue my content. Now on with the show. Welcome everybody to Steel Forged in Fire. My name is Joe. Welcome everybody to my blade and knife friends. If you are subscribed to my channel, you know that I have been talking about this upcoming interview, which is now, for quite a while now. And I am just very, very happy to be talking to today this gentleman that's across from me virtually. God bless virtual technology now, so we're able to do this, which I would love to be in a studio with him and shake his hand, but c'est la vie. But this is the next best thing, I guess. He's an American bladesmith. And as far as I'm concerned, he's an American icon because he brought the art of the Japanese sword into the States, and he does it so extremely well. And along with the fact that he has an amazing YouTube channel and he shares his skill and he helps to the aspiring bladesmith, anyone who's getting started or an experienced novice or experienced worker, and he shares his experience on the YouTube channel and just goes through the whole process of how he approaches making his swords, his philosophy behind it, and it's a very entertaining channel, along with his website, and he has also he's in a knife company for my knife people watching out there. He's into knives too, so we'll get into that as well. So I am extremely honored and happy to welcome Mr. Walter Sorrells. Walter, welcome to Steel Forged in Fire. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, brother. I am glad to be here.
Great to see you. So first off, before we get started into all the details and all the questions that people have for you, I just wanted to first, being in the craft and in the job that you're in, I just wanted to first, convey my ultimate respect and admiration for your craft. Now, even going back historically to the accounts of all the past masters and all the past bladesmith that worked with metal, and it fascinates and amazes me. I mean, every now and then I'll throw on one of those old Discovery Channel documentaries of the old masters, how they still work traditionally on making swords, and it's always fascinated me, and hence the name of my channel, Steel Forged in Fire. So basically how much I enjoy the craft. So historical times, ancient times, in terms of all the accounts and all the historical documentation of how they approach making swords, it always fascinated me from a young age, and that's how long I've been basically into swords and swordcraft. But even in current times, I sincerely respect your craft. I believe what you do, Walter, is more of a artistry in motion. I definitely believe that. And in particular, the knowledge and of past and present, your assertion and your grit as a smith, it's not everyone can be very successful because not everybody can really check all the boxes there, and you pretty much do it so well. We admire your Japanese style, steel formation, the strength and beauty and superior quality of your entire body of work, and I think I speak for pretty much everyone that's watching this right now. But I follow your channel, I follow your work, and thank you for being here.
Well, I appreciate all the compliments, but I look at it in a fairly humble way. Making chairs or chests of drawers, or building a house or whatever, every kind of craft at the end of the day is just an assembly of little skills that you pick up along the way.
Right.
and if you apply yourself to it, there's it's not airy fairy, Olympian kind of
Right.
stuff. It's just, one foot in front of the other. And that's really the way I've approached this from the very beginning. I started really knowing absolutely nothing. I'm
Right.
basically completely self-taught. And, I just learned by failing a lot.
Right. Actually, I have a funny story. I have a sword friend, Robert, from California, and we get together probably once a week and speak about an hour on the phone because we're both sword collectors. We both love katana, and we both kind of deal with the same forges and this and the other thing. And we kind of always talk about, what could have been better, what the perfect sword would be, and I attribute him to helping me out and kind of getting this discussion going because we're both in each other's heads. So thank you, Robert, for helping me out to get this going because you and me are the same in terms of that. First off, Walter, as a practitioner, because I know before you started your smithing, you were also a practicing practitioner. You have a background in terms of your martial arts training. So where did you start that, and what art forms did you practice, or do you still do practice?
It's a pretty long list. I started doing traditional Japanese karate. Back in my 20s, I guess, and I'd been like almost everybody that's interested in Japanese swords. I'd been interested in them since I was a kid.
Right.
Started doing martial arts and was just interested. Just to give you the thumbnail of all the things that I've practiced over the years, I've done Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Aikido,
Right.
Tai Chi, if you want to call that a martial art. Some people do. And Shin-Kendo. I've done, some Iaido styles.
Right.
So, my Japanese sword background mainly is from Shin-Kendo. But I did do, as I said, Iaido was part of the program for the karate school that I trained in for, about 20 years.
Art of the sword, learning the art of the sword.
Exactly.
That's some list you got there, Walter. That's fantastic. Okay, so you have quite a background in martial arts, in everything, in background of sword handling, learning the art of the sword. So at what point did you take an interest in smithing?
So that was about a little over 20 years ago. Just to give you a little more background on my complete inappropriate training for Japanese sword making.
Right.
My first career was as a novelist. I was a liberal arts major in college and really had absolutely no skills in metalworking or anything like that. And so anyway, but obviously, as I said, I had a lot of martial arts training. And so I was going to write a story about a guy who was swordsmith. So I thought, well, I wanted some kind of tangible sense of how a swordsmith goes about his job. And so I got this little tiny piece of steel and a Burns-O-Matic, propane torch, just something like you'd use for sweating the plumbing joint.
Right.
And a ball peen hammer. And I heated up this thing like I just barely got a little color in it, and I put it on a rock and I just bashed it with a hammer, and I barely was able to move this steel. But I was like, oh man, this is so fun. And I just kind of got psyched about it. So what I did next, and this is a great example again of the absolute wrong way to do this. I decided, okay, well, so I'll make a Japanese sword. So I had some book of katanas or whatever, and I took one and I bought a piece of O1 steel, which is like the standard steel that you would use to make drill bits or something on an oil rig,
Right.
And so I had this big old piece of O1 steel, and I traced out the outline of this katana on that big old chunk of steel. And then I used a jeweler's saw, which is like the most precise, slow thing you could possibly use to cut a piece of steel. I probably went through about 20 saw blades. I think it took me 3 days to saw through the outline of that little thing. And so I got done with that, and then I filed all the bevels in, and I got done, and I was like, okay, I have absolutely no clue what I'm doing and no business doing this. So I, threw that big old katana over in the corner of my shop. I just went all the way back to start from scratch, and I started making little bitty knives. I would take these knives in that I was making basically as metallurgical tests, and I'd show them to the guys, that I was doing, that I was training with in sword work. We'd practice, and then we'd go out drinking that night, and so I'd take these things to the bar, and I'd show them, and they were, they were very nice, but I know they were looking at them and they were like, what is this crap, but I was trying to learn some specific stuff. So my approach was building skill blocks, not trying to make perfect knives from the beginning, but learning to build something that that gave me a skill foundation to do other stuff later. And it took me a very long time, at least it seemed like a long time, when I was getting started, to sort of have enough of a foundation that I could start making something in the realm of Japanese swords. But, once I kind of got over that hump, all of a sudden I felt like, oh, it's starting to come together here, and I'm, doing something that's like semi-legit. Because I came at this as a practitioner and not as a sword connoisseur,
right,
or somebody who is, interested in, anime or something like that. I mean, I really looked at it as like, this is a screwdriver, it's a tool. And if it fails as a tool, then everything else that, all the boxes that it checks other than being a good tool don't matter. And so that's really always been my, guide star, pole star, whatever you want to call it, is, okay, does this thing work? Not, is it the prettiest? Is it the most fancy thing to hang on the wall? I just want it to be an effective tool first and foremost.
that is an extremely good point, because it becomes a tool for you because it's a tool that you use. So when you get into the beginning stages and you want to produce that tool to work for you, you know exactly how it should perform, and you don't want it to fail because it is a tool that you need. I mean, I can attribute it to myself as being, I'm a lifelong cinematographer and photographer, but before I actually started editing, I was a cameraman. But after you start editing, you realize, well, the camera's got to be doing this and this. So you know what? I need to change how I shoot and change how I do things because I know what the end result has to be. And
Right.
that's a really good point. So your background really attributed, I believe then your background attributed to you being such a passionate, bladesmith, because you know the way the sword should be, should handle, how durable they should be, and how they should perform.
Yeah, and at the same time, sometimes it makes me a little impatient with
Yes.
some customers because I think some people have a romantic notion of what a sword is, and
Right.
I'm not going to tell them they're wrong. It's just we're not necessarily going to be on the exact same page what I'm aiming to do. And that's just the way it is. That's
Yeah.
that's just one of the perils of being a swordsmith.
Gotcha. Guys, if you're not familiar with Walter's website, it's actually waltersorrells-blades.com. You should definitely check it out. It's a beautiful site, beautiful pieces, but the write-up and specifically, I'm actually looking at it right now. There is a page in his website called My Philosophy, and I have read it over and over again and again. And it's Walter, I got to tell you, it's fascinating to me how you perceive and how you approach before you even pick up a hammer, how you approach your conception of what a sword should be, what it should be able to do. Now, is there any way you can tell me in your own words, kind of summing up your philosophy as it's written on the website, what you believe and how you approach it?
My starting point is always, what's this thing trying to do? It's a cutting tool, so first and foremost, it has to cut. And, beyond that, and, the obvious elements of durability and so forth, I guess, I'm always trying to pay homage to the Japanese tradition. But this is really important to me. You know, I've lived in Japan.
Oh, you did?
You know, yeah, just briefly. I taught English over there, you know, in my 20s, and you know, I love Japanese culture, but you know, I don't have any pretense whatsoever of being Japanese. I don't try to pronounce everything the way a Japanese person would. I can fake a Japanese accent, but that's, you know, that's, you know, when you're trying to make a sword, first and foremost, you're trying to, you know, you have to humble yourself before that object. And,
Yes.
and, you know, that object comes as part of a tradition. I'm not part of that tradition. I mean, realistically, you know, I didn't apprentice myself to a Japanese smith, and you know, that's not my world. I'm an American. I'm proud of that. I feel like I know who I am and what I'm trying to do, and so I want to participate in that tradition, but I also want the sword to be an artifact of modernity. You know,
Right.
I'm a modern guy. I'm not afraid of using modern steels. I make my own tomahawk, and you know, so I can do the very traditional approach, but you know, I don't feel like, oh, it has to be this way or it has to be that way. You know, I'm just trying to produce an object sort of fulfills the function that it's intended to fulfill.
Right. Well, there's one particular thing that kind of sticks out on my mind whenever I read about your philosophy, and it's about, in terms of putting a piece of yourself or putting a piece of your soul, you feel like, into making the sword. Can you kind of broaden up on that? Because that really kind of, see, that one paragraph kind of brings me back to, you know, an ancient, you know, master that they put their heart and soul into what they make. And when you're buying a Walter Sorrells blade, you're buying a piece, you know, for ill or good or ill, I think you called it, or something like that, which is very interesting. You're buying a piece of yourself. So
right.
I thought that was astounding, a paragraph.
Yeah, so you know, one of the things on this point is I somewhat facetiously say that, you know, I'm making screwdrivers, but you know, at the end of the day, these are very complicated and difficult things to make. You know, a lot of people, especially sword collectors, are always talking about they want a perfect sword. They want the, you know, the epitome of the craft and all that sort of thing.
Right.
I always view this differently. You know, I know lots and lots of people, and I wouldn't say any one of those people is perfect or the best person. You know, they're all different, and I like them for different reasons. And so when I'm making a sword, I really do feel like you're getting a piece of me, you're getting a piece of my personality.
Right.
And you know, part of my approach is this kind of rough and ready, you know, it's got to be functional first and foremost. And you know, I mean, I like my swords aesthetically. I think they're beautiful, but
I think so too.
But you know, that's not the first thing I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to make something that's just going to be pretty up on a wall.
Your swords are made to be used. They're made to be used.
That's right. They're meant to be used, and as a result, you know, I think that you know, the object that you ultimately get, every single one of them is going to be different. Every one of them is going to be a different weight and so on. And, you know, ultimately, I feel like I'm kind of transmitting a piece of me to you.
Right. Very, very well said. Something very interesting that actually came up in one of my sword reviews, and a couple of people posted comments in terms of how I address the katana that I review. And most people really get insulted by calling them Japanese katana. So, because you know, there's a traditionalist out there that, you know, attribute the Nihanto, you know, as the only real Japanese katana, you know, made on Japanese soil by Japanese masters, and whatever is made outside of Japan should never be considered a Japanese sword or a Nihanto. Because Nihanto, I think, more than its meaning, took on a different conceptual feeling, you know, behind the word Nihanto. And a lot of people who own Nihantos, you know, respect that type of tradition. basically in respect of the etiquette for the traditional, Nihanto, I try to label them as Japanese style katana. But I had someone who posted a very interesting comment when I made that video, and I actually will give him credit. Donnie Be All Day. He's a really amazing knife reviewer and a really good friend. He actually brought up a really good point, and he had said to me, if you take the Japanese master out of Japan, you can take his polisher, you can take everyone, his whole crew, his forge, his coal, his iron sand, and if you take them and kind of magically just kind of relocate them to Illinois or something like that, and just put him there for a weekend, okay? And he did his work traditional way, and he made his steel, okay, and he produced his sword. He had his polisher, he has his people that work with him, and he produced the sword. Can you call his final product a Nihanto or a Japanese katana? Many traditionalists would say no, because it wasn't made on Japanese soil. So how would you answer that question? And leading up to also, how would you classify your blades?
So, the first thing is, generally I refer to my swords as Japanese style swords.
Right.
I don't claim to make Nihonto. I do make, some of my blades are functionally equivalent to Nihonto. In other words, they're made, using tamahagane, which is really, to me, the key point in what makes or doesn't make a Nihonto.
Right.
Beyond that, though, there's the question of, were you apprenticed to a Japanese smith? Are you part of this Japanese tradition, and so on? To me, this is sort of a hair-splitting thing, because I'm not trying to insert myself into that tradition. The swords that I make from modern steel and so forth, I mean, if you look at it, it's obviously made in the style of a katana. It's
right.
polished, like a traditional blade. It handles like a traditional blade, and in many functional aspects, it's actually quite superior to a traditional blade. I'm not saying that to, show off or something. I'm just saying that, the steel that was used in making traditional blades is all over the map. The quality of the smiths is all over the map. Some of them are good, some of them were not so good. Whereas if you're using modern steel, you have sort of a known quantity and some aspects of that allow you to make a fairly predictable high performance sword. The whole notion of what is or is not a Japanese sword, the idea that it has to be made on Japanese soil is ridiculous to me. If it's made by a Japanese, if it's made by a traditional Japanese smith, I don't care whether he's in London or whether he's in Tokyo, and he's using all the traditional techniques and tamahagane.
Right.
It's a Japanese sword, as far as it's a Nihonto. And, really, to me, that's where I like to draw the line. Nihonto over here and kind of everything else over there.
Right. I totally agree with you, and I'll end this segment with this comment, with this response. But I totally agree with you, and kind of my answer to him was exactly what you just said. I mean, if you check all the boxes, then I would really kind of call that a Japanese sword. Now, obviously, the traditionalists won't see it that way, and that's unavoidable, but I would definitely agree with you that if you take their skilled hands, it doesn't matter if it's on Japanese soil or American soil, it's the product that we're looking at, and that's really what it comes down to. Leading up to what you had said about tamahagane, now, making blades a traditionary way. Now, your method of working with tamahagane, how does it differ or simulate with the old ways of making tamahagane? I mean, historical ways of making tamahagane. And also, I mean, I believe you do, I know you do your own smelting. I've seen your videos. I really enjoy them. Where do you get your materials? What do you use? What's your opinion? Well, I'll get to your opinion of the iron sand that was traditionally used compared to your materials now, what you use to, do your smelting and produce your own tamahagane. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So, I've done it a whole bunch of different ways. There's a lot of experimentation involved with it. Jesus Hernandez and I worked together, really starting, 15 years ago now, probably. And we went through a whole bunch of different iterations, trying different kinds of materials and all that sort of thing. We've used iron ore from Minnesota, taconite. We've used pottery glaze mediums, different kinds of things. At the end of the day, what happens in the smelter is that you start out with a form of iron oxide. It can be either H2, I mean, Fe2O3 or Fe3O4, which are two different forms of iron oxide. Doesn't really matter which one you start with. As soon as it gets heated up, Fe2O3, which is basically rust, hematite, converts into magnetite, and the whole rest of the way, all the processes, chemical processes that happen inside the smelter happen exactly the same way. It doesn't matter whether you're using ore, that's pulled out of a river, or whether it's from Minnesota or Germany, or it's the chemical process is identical. Now, some people say, oh, in Japan they have this tiny little amount of titanium in the or that may well be. Does this have any metallurgical significance? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I don't really know. Again, I'm not claiming that I'm making the Honto. I'm just, duplicating the process as much as I can, and then, using, when it gets to the forge welding process, I'm using modern power tools and some approaches that they wouldn't use in Japan. But fundamentally the same kind of process is happening. You pour ore in the top, you get moon rocks out the bottom, you smash them up together and fold them at really high temperatures. They stick together, and eventually you get a piece of steel that you can use to make a sword from.
That's fantastic. That is fantastic. So generally what you're saying is it really doesn't matter where you get it from for the most part, because the process, if you're smelting, the process is going to give you the same result.
Right.
Yeah.
And, it may be that this tiny amount of titanium that is apparently, some people claim, is in the ore that's dredged out of Japanese creek beds and used in the tatara that they make all the, that they make the tamahagane in Japan with. It may be that has some metallurgical significance, like I said, but it may not. Who knows?
Right.
I certainly don't know. I don't even have an opinion on it.
That's just very interesting. And listen, there's a lot of traditionalists out there that just have these beliefs as far as how things should be done, and you shouldn't change anything. But you're a modern guy. I think I'm in modern times, and I appreciate the fact that you're approaching the tamahagane the same way, but I can totally agree with you as far as it really doesn't matter where you get it from. It's the process and it's your end result. So that's wonderful.
And in fairness, everybody comes at this from a different direction.
Right.
If your approach to this is to put the tradition in Japan on a pedestal and not want to change anything, I'm not going to argue with that. This tradition is an extraordinary tradition.
Yes.
This is something truly amazing. And, the guys that came up with all this stuff 1,000 years ago were really extraordinary people.
Absolutely.
And you have to honor that.
Of course.
So, as a modern guy, I say, hey, look, that's great. That's not exactly what I'm doing. But if somebody else feels that's the way to do it, God bless them.
And yes, I pay homage to them all the time, and I respect everything that they, you have to give them credit, because what they taught us 1,000 years ago and what we're still doing today, and obviously our products are going to be better, the metals are better, everything is, we have better things to work with, but you have to pray, you have to put homage to what they had taught us so long ago, and it's still being practiced to a certain extent today, and that is really truly remarkable. But comparing your methods of making your blades, now compare if you had made your traditional way, your tamahagane, how would you compare that to like a folded modern steels, or like, how do the results of the blades differ in behavior and properties such as like flexibility, hardness, edge holding, or modern steel or mono blades? Okay, do you think that the mono blades are superior than the folded blades, what the difference in different properties would be compared to, you know, Tomahawk, the way you produce it, or straight mono steel blades, even if they're folded.
To me, it's really a question of what you're looking for in the blade. I mean, for me personally, if I were just looking for pure performance, I'd use a mono steel. I mean, in my case, I like using W2. You know, you get a really nice hamon with it if you do everything right. You get good edge holding. I mean, really, W2 gives you about as good edge holding as any steel you can find in the general category that you would use to make Japanese swords with. On the far end, Tomahawk, to me, it's for tradition, it's for beauty, it's for you know, that
the aesthetics, the wood grain, the aesthetics of the blade.
Aesthetics and tradition. And then in the middle, you're folded modern steel, you're sort of splitting the difference, so you get the beauty of the grain.
Right.
But you know, I don't think it adds any particular performance. You know, there's some interesting metallurgical studies that have been done about folding that show possibly some increase in durability, but you're definitely going to lose a little in edge holding. And so, you know, honestly, the thing about all of this durability stuff is there are always people who are going to argue hair split about how good they are from a durability standpoint. You know, sometimes you're really playing off edge holding against you know, whether it's going to bend or not, or how, you know, whether it's more likely or less likely to snap if you know, try and chop up a 2x4 with it and stuff like that. There's no perfect way. You're always playing one kind of quality of the sword off against another quality.
Right. But your Tomahawk blades, like the way you produce them, how well do you think they perform in real world, you know, tamashigiri practice?
Clearly not as well as modern steel.
Modern steel. Or mono steel, like a straight mono steel blade.
Right. But, you know, that said, I mean, they're very durable. They just don't hold an edge quite as well. Really? Now, you know, I mean, I have not made tons and tons of Tomahawk blades. You know, I don't.
What do you mostly make? What do you mostly make? I mean, do you make recommendations to your customers as far as like as far as what they're looking for? Is it what you mostly recommend, or what are the blade architecture that you mostly made in terms, not the architecture, but the type of formation of the blade? Like, what do you normally do?
Depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for a nice thing to collect and stick in a safe, then maybe you should bias it more towards the aesthetics.
Right.
If you're just looking for a martial arts blade or a tamashigiri blade, then for me, you know, using a mono steel construction is best, because if nothing else, it's just cheaper.
So W2 steel is your steel of choice in terms of what you use to make your mono steel blades.
Right. And, you know, this kind of introduces something that's really, really important that a lot of people don't understand is, you know, guys get on the internet and there are 14 different people saying this kind of steel is the best. You know, and everybody's got an opinion, and none of them's an engineer, none of them's a metallurgist, none of them's a smith. They all think they have the right answer on what the best steel is. The best steel is the steel that's handled by the most competent smith.
Yes.
The heat treating process is way more important than the type of steel. There, you know, obviously there's certain kinds of steel that are not suitable for making katanas with, and that's a whole different question. But, you know, in terms of like, is this steel marginally better than that steel? It's a question of how you heat treat it.
You kind of just led up to my other question that I was going to lead up to, and you kind of answered it. So yes, it's how you heat treat it. It's the smith. It's in this. So regardless of the steel, and I believe this wholeheartedly, regardless of the steel, it's in the smith's hands as far as the heat treating, because that is the most important aspect of making a blade, is how well you heat treat the blade. So you can take 1060 steel. I'm sure in your hands, you could take 1060 steel and still make it an incredibly strong blade.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. No doubt.
So heat treating is 100%. So that's the answer to everybody's question, because yeah, there is so much talk and on the internet and even on my channel as far as, should I get 1095 or 1060 or should I go with L6 or anything like that? And I try to get them the same answer. You have to know the reputation of the smith that you're using or the forge you're using. What steel do they work well with? Like you can go with a forge in China that they work with 1060 steel all day long, and they do that very well. And then you'll take T10 steel or a tool steel. They don't work with it that well, and it'll break on you in one hit because they don't really know how to work with that steel. So it really is in the hands and the skills of the smith and the forge that's using the steel. So hopefully answers everyone's question as far as what is the best steel. It's really all about the smith.
Yeah, absolutely.
About how many hours does it take for you to create a tomahawk blade compared to a mono steel blade? And I'm sure it's going to be pretty laughable.
easily twice as much.
Twice as much.
The single biggest time sink, if you want to call it, the single biggest investment of time in the making of any Japanese style blade is in polishing the blade.
Yes.
And for people who are just getting started in this, it might be interesting. I mean, some people I'm sure watching this know this. The apprenticeship length for polishers in Japan is twice as long as the apprenticeship length for smiths. It's a very demanding part of the process. It's very, very time consuming. And so no matter whether you're using tomahawk or, whatever, it doesn't matter. If you're doing a lot of hand work, which I do using Japanese water stones, it just takes an enormous amount of time. That said, anything that's folded takes a ton of time. And when you're using tomahawk, there's, twice as much folding involved, and you have to do the smelting. So, I mean, it's just every time I do a tomahawk blade, I'm just like, oh my God, I'd forgotten how long this process is.
I mean, because starting from the smelting all the way down, I mean, it is an enormous amount of time and detailed work. And observation, that you have to put attention to. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, just to give you an idea of, the one little metric here. I just finished, or it's not finished, but I'm working on a tomahawk wakizashi, and I started with about 10 pounds of material for this blade, and it's now down in the 2-pound range.
Right.
And you just, every stage of the process, you're losing material, and to lose material in as slow a fashion as you do when you're forge welding and all that, you just can imagine how long this whole process takes. It's long.
It's incredible, and I commend you for your patience in kind of getting through that. Amazing, the amount of time and detail that goes into that. So probably when somebody calls you and say, I think I'm going to go to tomahawk blade, you got to be rolling your eyes and be like, all right, well, okay, I'll do it. It's a lot of work.
Every time an order comes to me, I sort of take a deep breath and I'm like, okay. I mean, the flip side is it's an enormous challenge. The end result is something that it's just not like anything else that I do, and so you really feel like you've done something when you make one of those.
I think that your point as far as being somewhere in the middle, as far as having a folded steel blade. You have, a very strong blade, but you still have the wood grain, beautiful aesthetics, but you can still use it and train with it and not have to worry about the strength and durability of the sword. So I think that going that in-between route of a folded steel blade, I think is great because you have the best of both worlds.
I would say about the tomahawk blades, I mean, they use them in battle for 1,000 years. It's not like these things suck.
Right. Right.
I mean, it's marginal differences, but they are a little bit softer. And I mean, my main thing with tomahawk is just look. It takes an enormous amount of time. You're producing an artistic piece.
Right.
It's expensive, so why go out and miss a cut and hit a nail in your sword stand and, blow up a $10,000 sword.
I would love to own a sword traditionally made tomahawk, but I can't really see using it.
No,
My personal
not me.
opinion. I would admire it. I would put it up. I would show it off. I would look at it. I would maintain it. I would let it last forever and pass it on to my kids. But
Yeah, and
that's what I personally would do with it.
it's nice to know that it could be used
Yes.
if it had to be, but
I don't have the heart to.
yeah, exactly.
I don't have the heart to. I definitely
And
don't.
I will say, you know, I've taken maybe 2 small blades that I made from Tomahawk and you know, tested them to failure, and
Right.
you know, that was a little heartbreaking to do, but it was really educational too, and it was, you know, it was nice to be able to see, okay, yeah, these things will take the kind of punishment you want to dish out for a real weapon.
All right, so Walter, according to like the different types of katana blades you make, first, who do you produce for? And are different types of steel constructed and centered to cutting practitioners, to dojo or lido or artistry? For example, what type of constructed blade would you recommend for a cutting practitioner? If somebody said, you know, I am a cutting practitioner, I want you to make me the blade that's going to work for me. I want to cut bamboo. I want to cut tatami mats. You know, I want something durable that's really going to last me. And what would you recommend also in terms of the blade contour, in terms of like shinogi or shobu or hirazukuri or unikubi zukuri? Can you speak about that as far as what you would recommend a cutting, someone who's really going to take the sword and use it and cut with it and practice with it on a normal occasion?
Well, you know, like I said, I kind of get about half of my customers are more collector type people,
Okay.
and about half are more martial arts kind of people. The
Right.
martial arts people, I'm always going to say, hey, look, if you know, if money is no object, then do what you want. But, you know, for most of us, this is a pretty big purchase. And so, you know, I feel like you get more bang for your buck using a modern steel. W2 happens to be my favorite steel. That's kind of what I focus on. But there are other swordsmiths who use different things. That's, you know, like I said, it's really a question of you know, how comfortable and skilled the swordsmith is with that particular steel. So as far as, you know, that kind of the issue is in terms of steel. As far as geometry goes,
Yes.
you know, the traditional Japanese sword, the shinogi zukuri with 2 bevels was really designed to cut armor, and it was designed, you know, the traditional Japanese lacquered armor wasn't as heavy as, say, Western plate armor, but still it's armor. And so you needed a really robust sword that could take a pretty good whack. And so that's really what that geometry was intended to do. If you just want to cut tatami, hirazukuri is the way to fly. We used to call them cheater swords. I mean, we used to test out, you know, me and some of the guys that I trained with, we would test all these different swords that I made, and we'd cut mammoth pieces of bamboo and, you know, just bend the swords and just wreck the swords. And hirazukuri blades are quite robust if they're well made, and they will cut much better. And it's just a simple matter of geometry. They're, you know, the blade angle is shallower, and therefore there's less resistance going through a target, and they cut better.
It's so interesting that you mentioned hirazukuri, because I was actually going to ask you about a hirazukuri blade. And a little bird told me that you really like making hirazukuri blades, and that little bird, Matthew Jensen. So, and I'm sure you know Matthew Jensen. So I actually spoke to him today, and he's like, oh, you know, ask him about hirazukuri, because he really loves making hirazukuri blades, because he knows that I just did a review on a hirazukuri that I have, and I was cutting tatami with it and all that. So it's very interesting that you say that. So that would be your blade contour of choice if someone approached you saying, you know, they're cutting tatami mats. That would be what you would recommend it to them.
Yeah. I mean, you know, if you're cutting a lot of really big bamboo, maybe you're a little better off using shinogi zukuri.
Right.
But if you're mostly cutting tatami,
Straight tatami, yeah.
then hirazukuri will simply cut better.
Right.
Now, I mean, it is a reality that there's a thinner geometry, and you know, the result of that is that, you know, at least in theory, it's a little more fragile. But realistically, I mean, like I said, you know, the guys that I used to train with, we would go out in my backyard and we'd try out different swords that I'd made, and you know, we would really go at it hard with really kind of abusive targets. Right. And sometimes you bend the swords and we just throw them on the floor and we'd stomp on them until they were straight again. I mean, literally. And you know, I never had a sword break or anything like that under any of those circumstances. And so, you know, I think people who worry about swords breaking, you know, if it's a well-made sword, and you know, if it's a badly made sword, it could break on a, you know, a twig. So you just never know. You know, I've seen blades from really most of the guys that make blades in the States, and you know, I've seen just humongous blades and really skinny ones, and you know, so it's kind of all over the map. And I feel like mine are all over the map too. And then some of that's driven by customers. I mean, a lot of times customers will say, I want it exactly 1 3/8 inches at Motohaba, and you know,
they give you the exact
all
measurements.
That kind of stuff. Yeah.
Right. What mediums do you reckon your new swords to be used for? And like, I mean, you answered my question as far as tatami, for the Hirazukuri, for anything a little bit harder targets, maybe a shinobi Sakuri and things like that. But how do you specifically do you test your swords? Like, what steps do you go in to test the strength and durability of your swords? Like, what targets do you use?
Right. So now, you know, I'm, you know, minimum of $5,000 into a blade for anything that I make now.
Right.
And you know, this is my livelihood, so I'm not going to go out there and just wreck $10,000 worth of swords. No,
I'm not saying you do it all the time, but have you ever done it and have an idea of, you know, how much they can take?
Right. So the thing I was going to say is that when I first got started, and this was more of a hobby for me, and I wasn't trying to make any money on it. I used to do that all the time. Like I said, there were about 3 or 4 of us in my Shinkendo dojo who just did a lot of test cutting. You know, outside of class, we'd go cut, you know, a pickup truck load full of bamboo, or you know, we'd buy just tons and tons of mats, and we'd make big old, you know, 5 mat, 10 mat rolls, and you know, we just try all kinds of different stuff. And I cut 2x4s and stuff like that, and you know, I never ran into anything that destroyed a sword. Now, this is one really important point: is Japanese swords, you know, it's intrinsic to the traditional approach of making a Japanese sword that they bend. So if your technique is not good, or if you hit a knot on a piece of wood, or you to go through the joints in a piece of sizable bamboo or whatever, you will bend your sword.
Right.
That's just the way it is, and it's not something to go in and cry about. You just go back and straighten the sword.
Okay, I did a review on this Hirazukuri sword. I kind of put like wooden dowels rolled up in the tatami in the core, and then what happened was I kind of hit the target with the upper end of the blade, so it kind of it took a little bit of a set. So so how would you recommend me or anybody else, because everyone always has problems, has questions of how they should kind of, you know, deal with their blades. In layman's terms, if someone just had a bend in their blade like mine, like how would I go about trying to bend it back?
Yeah, I mean, literally, you can stick it over your knee. Obviously, you want to be careful. It's a sharp blade.
Of course,
But, you know, take a couple of towels to, you know, wrap around it or whatever, and then just you know, get your hands as close to that point where it's bent as you can, and just, you know, put some mojo on it, just put a little muscle on it, and the main thing is just don't get over eager and try and, you know, bend the crap out of it. Just try and ease it back until it's straight. And you know, anybody can do this. It's not a big deal.
That's Walter. You say it's not a big deal, but hearing it from you, there's so many people that have these questions about, oh my God, my sword took a bend and it took a set, and what am I going to do? And it can be simple, but you just have to kind of be cautious in terms of, you know, how you approach it. And thank you for commenting to that. A lot of people wanted me to ask you about your opinion, and I'm not talking about, like, you know, a lot of the cheaper Chinese forges, but like Sky-Gero, Citadel, Motohara, Evolution blades. Would you want to render an opinion of the type of work they do? Because that's probably like the upper echelon in the production world.
You know, the main thing that I found was that the swords, you know, that were made by fairly new companies were uneven.
Right.
You know, because they make a lot of them, and so the heat treating process wouldn't be exactly the same sword to sword, and so
Right.
some of them would be fantastic, and some of them would be, you know, just garbage, and you couldn't really tell, you know, one after the other, which was going to be good and which wasn't. So, you know, the main thing I would say is stick with the higher end, more established forges. If
like Citadel,
you know,
Motohara, Evolution blades, things like that.
yeah,
You know,
if you're planning on using them.
Right.
If you're not, then hey, it doesn't really matter. Just get something that looks cool.
right? I gotcha. Let me do cheap. You know, I'm talking about cheap Chinese swords threaten the livelihood of USA swordsmiths, or do they help providing like an affordable entry point into the hobby? Like, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there are so many levels of swords available out there, and there are a lot of people who, you know, were interested when they were kids, or they watch anime or whatever, and you know, watch the old samurai movies, and so you know, when they're very young, they got their first job or whatever, you know, they spent $99 on eBay and got some piece of junk, you know, and you learn by buying something, messing around with it, you know, seeing what you like about it and what you don't, talking to people, you know, you accumulate information, and as you know more stuff, then you start to get more interesting blades. So, you know, I don't have anything against the Chinese blades. To me, I'm not competing with Chinese blades. And here's the real difference. You know, if I just wanted some kind of functional blade to cut something with, I could go out and buy 5 Chinese swords, test them all out, and one of them would be pretty good,
Right.
you know, for sure.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that. If somebody buys a sword from me, I'm not going to tell you this is going to kill all these terrible Chinese
This
swords.
is the sword to rule them all.
Right. No, it's not that at all. What you're getting from me is, you know, it's a kind of communication from me to you. And this gets back to what we were talking about earlier. Whereas if you buy a sword from a Chinese manufacturer, there's some dude with some giant power hammer, and
Right.
he's, you know,
Right.
cranking out 20 swords a day. And those guys are really skilled by now. You know, when I first got started, a lot of those forges were kind of fly by night. And I mean, it was real hit or miss. There's some pretty skilled guys doing this now. But they're still factory workers, you know.
Right.
They're guys who are, you know, clocking in at the morning and, you know, clocking out at the end of the day, and they're not giving a lot of personal thought to the 15th sword they make in a day. Whereas I'm thinking really hard and really trying to do something kind of interesting with the blade that I make. Does that make it necessarily better from a functional standpoint? Maybe. The reason behind buying a sword made in Japan or a sword made by me or Howard Clark or somebody
Right.
should be different from why you would buy a $99 Chinese sword.
Oh, that is,
and there's
100%.
nothing wrong with that.
Right, no, 100%. So, I mean, the way I see it, I mean, buying a Walter Sorrells blade, you're buying a true custom product. And the fact that you work on a one-on-one basis, one-on, one-off basis, as far as working specifically on that blade, you know exactly who's working on it. You speak to that person, and you can, like you said, you take measurements, people have requests, and they know that they're getting a specific product that's made. And you know what? You're selling your reputation because your blades are wonderful, okay? I've learned more about your blades through Matthew Jensen's channel. I mean, the ones that he has shown on his channel are stunning. And you're buying a piece of Walter's reputation in terms of how he approaches the product, and the fact that his hands are actually working on it. And yes, when you go to a production house, you really don't know exactly who's going. I mean, they'll put their name on the tang and stuff, but your blades are strictly a custom artistry that's coming from your hands. So you're buying a reputation from Walter, and it's a truly custom katana. So that's the way I see your particular blades.
Right, and that's the process that I go through. With anybody who buys one from me. It's I mean, I hardly sell anything on spec anymore.
Right.
I've got one sword that's available on my website for and that's probably the first katana that's been on my website for 10 years or something.
Right.
I mean, it's been a long time. Right. And, it's just because everything that I do is custom. I communicate back and forth, put it all on paper, make sure that they know to the, quarter inch or whatever, how long it's going to be and all that sort of thing. We come to a full agreement about what the project's going to be. And that way, by and large, there's no misunderstanding.
Of course. Why do you think there's not more like U.S. outfits that make better than junk quality katana? Like why do you think there's not like a U.S. version of Hanwei?
It's money.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of labor that's required to make even a crummy Chinese sword is, you would not believe it. And if they weren't, paying 9 cents an hour to those guys over there, they just couldn't make what they make. I mean, when I see not the absolute junk, but, kind of lower end stuff, the handles are wrapped pretty nicely, and, there's some ray skin there, and this and that, and there's some actual lacquer on the, you look at all the processes that are involved in this thing, and it's astonishing what some of these Chinese outfits charge.
So it just really comes down to the price of labor in the States compared to the price of labor in China, and that's how they're 100%. Able to get away with kind of putting. I mean, I had purchased like a Kobu style blade with pretty much the fully loaded sword, whatever you want to call a fully loaded sword, and in like the $400 range, and that's like unheard of, and that's that's basically what they offer.
I mean, one of the issues is that the swords bend when they're quenched, and they don't bend the same on every sword. So that means that every scabbard, forget about the blade itself, if you could CNC make the blade, which you could, then there's all the polishing of the blade, and there's the polishing, and then there's the making of the scabbard, and the scabbard's going to have to be pretty much custom made. Right. And so you're looking at a lot of skilled labor, and skilled labor in America is very expensive.
Very expensive. Because me personally, I would love to have more options in the States to be able to, instead of having to go the whole process of, listen, I have nothing against ordering from China or buying from China. I mean, there's a lot of there's some forgers that do some fine work there, but I would love to be able to kind of just call up a New York State's number, give them my order, and get it, within a reasonable amount of time, because now the shipping is getting so difficult in terms of the government, as far as them shipping swords out. It's right. Like SF Express, there's a couple of different EMS, there's a couple of companies they used to use to ship the swords out that they're not able to ship them anymore. I think UPS is now doing it, and it's getting more and more difficult for them to ship the swords out. So it's more of an aggravation factor. So I always wish that just somebody in the States would just produce good quality swords at volume, but I'm not expecting the best, but something at volume, good quality, something that I can kind of just have for cutting, have for just normal practice or something like that. But I don't know if that's around the corner. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but you proved your point. I think it's a little difficult to kind of do, and that answers the question. I know a lot of people wanted me to ask you that question. We all know that you produce blades, but can someone purchase a totally completed katana with all the fit and finish furniture, or do you like work with a company that finishes the katana completely? Do you do it in-house? Can someone physically order a totally completed katana from you?
I prefer not to do full mounted swords. I do them occasionally.
Right.
And there's usually some special reason. There's something about that particular blade that's kind of interesting. You know, I'm doing you know, one project that you know, seemed kind of cool to me, and so I'm doing the mounting for it. But as a general rule, I just like to make the blades.
Right.
You know, I feel like you're spreading your skill set so
Right.
thin that I can just tell you I don't wrap a handle as well as I forge a blade.
So, to all my knife audience out there, I just want to let you know that Tactix Armory was founded by Walter. He basically produces incredible knives, EDCs, foldables, fixed blades. I mean, you pretty much do EDCs and fixed blades, correct? Okay. Can you kind of speak a little bit about Tactix Armory, what you stand for, what clients you cater to, what you normally produce knives for, what's their end purpose in terms of the knives you produce in Tactix?
So most of the knives that I make for Tactix Armory are fixed blades. The main kind of idea of Tactix Armory is just very durable, usable, functional knives. You know, trying to use the best materials. And really, you know, they're not fancy. They're not show ponies. They're just knives that you can take out in the boonies and trust will get you home.
Okay, so they're just very durable, real deal used. I mean, they're made for basically someone. They're not looking for all the frills. I mean, because they are beautiful knives. I mean, the contours, the blade they're gorgeous. But they're knives that your purpose is for them to be used every day, and they won't fail you. That's the purpose of your knives. That's plain and simple.
That's the whole deal.
And there's a large audience out there that are looking for knives exactly like that. So, I'm going to put a link to all of the everything we're discussing on this video in terms of Tactix Armory, Walter's personal website, his YouTube page. So if you're interested in looking into that, I will have links, and you could look it in the description to get some more info directly from the sites themselves.
And, you know, just to add a little on to that, you know, I'm a competitive shooter, you know, been a martial artist for a long time. I'm actually not practicing anymore now that I'm an old broken up man. But you know, I've spent a lot of time around people who are interested in self-defense, you know, cops and military personnel and,
Yes.
and people who train in the martial arts and so on. And so, you know, my knives are really in that kind of philosophy of things that are just tools for guys who take their personal protection
who really rely on the
outdoors
knives, right?
seriously,
Who
you know.
extremely rely on their knives for their work and for their protection. That's
Right.
That's interesting, because that's a really good point. That's you're catering to law enforcement is a large part of your clientele that would order from Tactix Armory.
Right.
Interesting, because that's a large audience out there that you know, look for knives, and it's Tactix Armory, guys. Check it out. I think you'll find something you really like. And I know you're saying there's no frills, but I just think there's such a simple beauty in some of the EDCs and the fixed blades that you have there that are very appealing to me. I think, yeah, guys, check that out. I think you'll be really impressed with the knives that are on Tactix Armory. I was. Would you ever consider making or ever have any desire to make European style swords?
Well, you know, when I was a kid, I was into knights in armor and all that stuff. So yeah, it's one of those back burner kind of things.
Right.
I mean, I'm always saying, "Oh man, I gotta make it," but I never have. I mean, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I still haven't made not a single European sword.
Really?
So surely someday it'll happen, but I just never gotten around to it.
Do you feel like you've just been so busy just making the katana that you really didn't have any downtime enough for you to really go in and say, "Oh, let me try this"? Is that really why?
You know, one of the things about being a self-employed person is that, I mean, you just have no time. You have no
Yes.
time. If you're serious about what you're doing, you work weekends, you work nights. You know, there was a time when I was writing books and making swords, and you know, there were times. I mean, I was working 80 hours a week.
Oh
You
my
know,
goodness.
and it just kind of happened that way. And so, if something's not a fastball down the middle, I got to get this done. It doesn't happen.
So as I said before, guys, Walter has an extremely popular YouTube channel. And again, I'll leave the link for it, so you definitely check it out, sub it. I mean, it's so much useful information, and pretty much it's professional. It's extremely professional. It's detailed, and you have many instructional videos on how to approach to be a smith. Also, do you have like a training course or something like that that you offer? Is it through the website, or is it that you have like books or instructional
Yeah,
videos? Or...
on Walter Sorrells Blades, WalterSorrellsBlades.com, I have a series of videos that I do. You know, I sell them as DVDs, but if you contact me directly, I can get you a downloadable link to them. I don't do that normally, but I
Right.
can do it. They cover polishing, forging, hamones, mounting, you know, all the crafts that go into making Japanese swords. So if you're interested in, you know, trying this as a hobby, I've got a whole series of videos that do address that. And those are not things that are available in, you know, these smaller bite type
Right.
things that I do on YouTube.
Is anyone out there that's looking to follow in the footsteps of Walter, or a smith, a smith in smithing in general? Definitely take advantage of that. And if you watch his YouTube channel and see his expertise and how he approaches everything, it's really strictly remarkable. It's very entertaining, and it's very instructional, and it's very interesting at the same time. It's there's not enough adjectives, but I think that's just because I'm just so into the art that I watch it. I'm like, wow. I mean, that's great. So yeah, definitely check that out. The instructional videos. Check out Walter's website. You can get more information on that. All right, Walter. So if someone wanted to follow in your footsteps and become a knife or sword maker, what would you tell them? And do you think there is enough money for a normal life? You know, wife, kids, food on the table, paying your bills. Like how would you tell someone to approach it, and what recommendations would you make?
So a couple of things. I mean, the first thing is, you just have to go out in your shed and start making stuff. I really recommend, if you've never done anything, get a file, get some sandpaper, get a little short piece of metal,
Right.
Piece of steel that you can buy, and watch some of my videos, or plenty of other guys on YouTube will show you how to make a very simple knife out of steel that you can buy over the internet. Make it with a file. See if you like it.
Right.
If you like it, and you can't not do it, then you will do it.
Right.
And that's really the whole key. Is if there's, if you're like, well, I could be an accountant or I could be a sword maker, be an accountant.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
there's a much better market and a lot more stability in being an accountant or a lawyer or whatever. But if you're passionate about it, then follow that passion. Now,
Of course.
the thing that I'll caution people, and I've had two different artistic careers in my life. I started out as a novelist, and I spent, I've published, I don't know, 30, 35 novels. And then I started doing the sword thing as kind of a hobby, and it, eventually turned into, a profession. In both cases, there's a long period of time where you're not making very much money.
Right.
And you either need to start when you're real young, or you need a very supportive spouse.
Yes.
And I mean, I can't stress enough how important the support of my wife has been throughout my entire career, both as a writer and as a sword maker.
Right.
Having two incomes in your house helps, because any artistic career is going to go up and down, you know, and you know, the years where the economy's bad, people don't necessarily want to go throwing away lots of money on, you know, purchases that aren't critical to their lives, and so your income's going to go up and down a bit, and you just have to strap in and be willing to do that.
Right.
One more point, you know, along those lines is, if you think you're just going to make swords and people are just going to throw money at you, you're dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
You must understand that you're an entrepreneur. You know, whether you're selling potato chips, you own a Dunkin' Donuts, you know, it doesn't matter. You're selling stuff. And if you're naive about that, then you're in big trouble. It doesn't mean that you're some money grubbing jerk. You just have to understand that you have to put a certain amount of labor and a certain amount of, you know, material on the table in order to produce that a good.
Right.
And you're going to have to feed your family, and you're going to have to pay your mortgage. And if those two things don't add up,
right,
you know,
yeah,
then you're going back to work at the factory or the law firm or whatever it is that, you know, was your B choice in life.
And you really just have to have a passion for the art, and a passion and a persistence. And with passion comes persistence, and with persistence comes expertise, and with expertise comes clients. So it's you definitely have to start having an interest and a passion for it, which seems like how you started, because you know, you developed a passion for it. You had an interest in it, and then you developed a passion for it, and then you were persistent. I know, you know, you told us the whole story about, you know, starting off and messing things up and then starting over and over again. So that's definitely something you need to start with. So guys, listen, if you have a passion for it, don't be afraid to do it. Try it out. You know, try out something small, see how it works out for you, and then just kind of build, you know, work on your craft from there. You know, make it like a side thing or a hobby, and if it comes out to something, it's you know, you got something good there. So if you have a passion for it, you have an interest, please take a look at Walter's YouTube channel and his instructional videos, and he'll guide you. I mean, there's so many videos on there. You have so many videos on there. You have such a large following, and you can definitely find something there in the topics that'll help you or guide you along the way in getting to your ultimate goal. Guys, I know it was very nice of you, and I'm really appreciative for the last pre-video that I put out for introducing Walter's interview. I had asked you to put out some questions that you would want to ask Walter. So I kind of, because we have a time limit here, I kind of narrowed it down to some questions. So I'm going to try to, we're going to ask them of Walter now, and you'll get his answers. So first one I have here, this is coming from Daniel V. Blades. That's his YouTube name. Can any sword be an effective wood chopping tool, or does physics not allow for durability when striking hard objects once a blade is past a certain length? And if so, what would you estimate that length to be?
I really couldn't say a specific length, but you know, I've used katanas to chop up 2x4s, and
you have?
Oh yeah. And you know, that's definitely not something that's going to destroy a properly made sword.
Because that's so funny, because there are so many. I have always been taught that, you know, you should never chop wood with your katana. Listen, I know that, and I know, you know, Matthew's videos, like he really puts things through torture tests to test them, and I see him chopping wood, but I always felt like you shouldn't use your katana to chop wood. But so you're saying a katana, if it's made well and tempered well, it should be able to chop a 2x4.
Yeah, I mean, I've chopped lots and lots of 2x4s. I don't really recommend it, you know, but you can do it.
In a couple of words, what are the ups and downs of the sword making process? What's the most unusual request that you have had? And this is coming from Rusty Knife Lover. Thanks, Rusty.
The ups and downs are, I mean, you know, some of it's probably financial, honestly, you know, especially when I was getting started. You know, sometimes I would, you know, I sold swords for too little money,
right.
And so, you know, I'd commit myself to projects that once I got deep into them, I realized I was just.
I wish I knew you back then.
I was getting skinned on. Yeah, really. But you know, the other thing is that you know, nothing is ever perfect. You're always fighting to be better, to, you know, you feel like you're warding off failure all the time.
Right.
And so psychologically, you just got to be prepared to fight through it all the time.
And really quick, what's the most unusual request to your
honestly,
recent memory?
I'm not really sure. I've got one guy right now who's interested in having me make a sword out of a meteor. So that's something pretty rare.
And he's providing you the meteor? That's
yeah, I mean, if we do this, that's how that'll work.
That's pretty damn interesting, actually.
I had a guy want to, you know, have like some kind of gems encrusted in the handle or something. I was like, no, that's not me.
Well, let me know after you forge the blade out of the meteor. Let me know if it glows in the dark. I would love to know that, and get that on video, and please send it to me. So that's the question that I have. I have Donnie B all day. What's up there, D-Bad? He had asked, do you prefer, and I don't know if we could call this at a personal, maybe we'll ask you as a practitioner or someone who uses swords, okay? Do you prefer a narrow katana for speed or wide katana for power?
I like sort of on the low end of medium, you know, a slimmer,
right,
medium-sized blade. I don't like super fat blades, really heavy blades. To me, there's no justification for that. You know, if you're not fighting somebody in armor, there's really no reason whatsoever for a really heavy blade. That's just, I mean, frankly, to me, it's kind of stupid.
Right.
But you know, beyond that, I want something that's slim enough to cut, but that's going to be reasonably durable. So, you know.
Yeah, somewhere in between. I had Steve Agora had a question, something about he wanted to know a little bit more about spring tempering, and if he knew anything about it in feudal Japan, and if it's possible to have a spring temper on blades with hormones. Because a lot of people in the market are really into spring tempered blades.
Right. So the guy who kind of pioneered this was Howard Clark with his L6 blades.
The L6s, yeah.
And you know, a lot of people think there's something special about L6. There's not. It's just that the metallurgy or the, you know, the component parts of that alloy make it so that it's heat treatable to produce a springy back and a hard edge.
Right.
But there's a trade-off. The hard edge is not as hard as a blade that's made from W2 or 1095 or something like that, and has a softer, more flexible back.
Right.
That's just the trade-off you make for having that spring-tempered type blade. I could go into the, you know, metallurgical process of doing that.
Generally speaking, there is a trade-off. I mean, the spring-tempered blades, the spring steel, as everyone calls them, they'll take a bend, you know, and bend back, but you don't have the edge retention, and you might have to go back and resharpen it a couple of times because it won't hold the edge for as long. And again,
really important part here is it's not really about the steel, though that's part of the equation. Right. It's really about the heat treating process. Right. You know, Howard's developed a process that does it for him. I mean, if you can read a TTT chart, you can figure out how that process works. I've done it myself sometimes.
Right.
And, you know, to me, the trade-off is not worth it. If your technique is bad enough that you're going to be bending blades all the time and that worries you, maybe you should practice more. That's my theory.
That's a perfect answer.
That's not knocking anybody.
No, but that's a good answer.
Type of blades. Yeah. It's just that's my personal view on it. And, you know, like I said, I've made blades like that, so it's not like, oh, you know, I just don't know how that works. You know, it's just that everybody's got something that seems cool to them, and if that's the thing that seems cool to you, then that's what you should get.
I think that's a very reasonable answer to that question, and thank you, Steve, for asking that question. Sandman from YouTube had asked, thanks, Sandman, is the longer Kisaki application, an Okisaki, significantly or moderately harder to forge, and does it affect the balance and performance of the overall blade largely? An Okisaki.
Basically, no and no. For those who aren't familiar, Okisaki is just a longer tip on a Shinogi Zukuri blade. Right. It's just a different approach. They're harder to polish. I will say that they're not harder to forge, but the polishing is a little trickier.
Does it affect the strength of the sword?
What's that?
Does it affect the strength of the sword having an Okisaki as opposed to not?
Sure. I mean, the tip is going to be more fragile because it's long and skinny.
Right.
But I mean, to me, it's kind of a decorative thing. They look cool, I think. So, the choice is more to me anyway, aesthetics than
anything else. Perfect. All right, Walter, listen, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for spending so much time. We covered so many different areas of sword making and background on you and the products you make and the industry, and I really appreciate you spending the time to sit with us and hear everything you have to say, and it's incredibly valuable to me, and I'm sure everyone that's watching. Walter, listen, thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for spending the time with us. It was a fantastic interview. Thank you for all of your time, and I really appreciate you joining me for the interview here today.
My pleasure.
All right, guys, that's all we have here for you today. I really hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, Walter Sorrells, for all of his knowledge and sharing his expertise, his background, and how it's so astonishing how he approaches the art and how he approaches his craft in making the blade. So I hope you got a lot out of it, and please take a look at my description. I'm going to have everything on the description as far as his websites and just to get some more information from him. And if you were interested in contacting Walter, you obviously go to his website. You can contact him and start your whole journey in getting a near perfect Walter Sorrells blade. Thank you for joining me, guys. This is Joe, Steel Forge and Fire. Peace out. Have a great night, great day, depending on when you're watching this, guys. Thanks for joining me. Have a good one, guys. A message. 22 veterans a day take their own lives. We're trying to grow awareness on this channel. Hashtag 22 a day. Message to our veterans. Veterans, you have a place here. You have a place and support in the entire knife and sword community. Please seek help if you are in despair.